Sowing the seed, my hand is one with the earth. Wanting the seed to go, my mind is one with the light. Hoeing the crop, my hands are one with the rain. Having cared for the plants, my mind is one with the air. Hungry and trusting, my mind is one with the earth. Eating the fruit, my body is one with the earth. We open this service with these words by Wendell Berry from his 1985 collection of poems. Today, August 1st, is the day some witches and pagans celebrate as Lammas, the spiritual successor to harvest festivals in the British Isles. This is a time when many reflect on the metaphorical seeds they have sown and the things in our lives that are coming to fruition. In that spirit of harvest, I also want to consider transformation with you. How are you transforming your harvest this year? And in turn, how is it transforming you? With these things in mind, I want to welcome you to this Sunday service of the First Unitarian Church of Des Moines. Thanks for joining us this morning. My name is Birch Spick. My pronouns are they, them, and theirs. I'm a member of this congregation's celebrant team, and I'm glad to offer you this service this morning. Barb Martin is our celebrant and song leader this morning. Bruce Martin is our pianist. The UU singers are providing our special music. For this coming week, Susan Jellinger is our pastoral care associate, so please talk with her if you need some support in the coming week. Lyra Halston is the membership coordinator. If you have any questions about First Unitarian or would like to be connected to our activities, please email her at membership@ucdsm.org. You'll find her email in the chat. Let's pause as we begin this service to acknowledge the Indigenous land we occupy, no matter where we gather. The building of this congregation stands in the traditional homeland of the Bahoje people, known also as the Iowa, who live primarily in the states of Nebraska, Kansas, and Oklahoma. It is also in the homeland of the Meskwaki and Sauk peoples who still live in our state. When you hear a land acknowledgement, consider giving, even something small, to an Indigenous cause or mutual aid project.
Our chalice words come from Reverend Betts Weinecke. May this flame symbol of transformation since time began. Fire our curiosity, strengthen our wills, and sustain our courage as we seek what is good within and around us. Our gathering song is number 12, O Life That Maketh All Things New. All verses and the words are in the chat box. Keep your phone, everything muted, but joyously sing along, please. Good morning. I'm Barbara Martin. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. Whether you are here for an hour, for a lifetime, or somewhere in between, thank you for joining us in this community that grows ethically and spiritually, serves justly, and loves radically. This digital service is being recorded and will be available to view later on the church's website or our YouTube page. Feel free to keep your cameras on, but of course be muted. After this service, we'll sort out into breakout rooms for a virtual coffee service and conversation fellowship, and your favorite snack or drink, which you will provide. And we welcome you then to turn off your mics, turn them on so that you can communicate with each other. Our Faith in Action partners for this year are Central Iowa Immigrant Support Coalition and Planned Parenthood of North Central States. Central Iowa Immigrant Support Coalition is a group of advocacy organizations for immigrants in our area. And one of their member organizations is a longtime Faith in Action partner of ours, El Éxito. El Éxito's mission is to provide programming that builds the leadership potential of Latinx youth across the state through college preparation, career development, civic engagement, family support, and celebration of culture. Our other Faith in Action partner, Planned Parenthood, is committed to providing, promoting, and protecting reproductive and sexual health through high-quality care, education, and advocacy. Welcome.
Our story for all ages this morning is The Curious Garden by Peter Brown.
And now, The Curious Garden, written and illustrated by Peter Brown. There once was a city without gardens, or trees, or greenery of any kind. Most people spent their time indoors. As you can imagine, it was a very dreary place. However, there was one boy who loved being outside. Even on drizzly days, while everyone else stayed inside, you could always find Liam happily splashing through his neighborhood. It was on one such morning that Liam made several surprising discoveries. He was wandering around the old railway, as he did from time to time, when he stumbled upon a dark stairwell leading up to the tracks. The railway had stopped working ages ago, and since Liam had always wanted to explore the tracks, there was only one thing for the curious boy to do. Liam ran up the stairs, pushed open the door, and stepped out onto the railway. The first thing he saw was a lonely patch of color. Wildflowers and plants were the last things he had expected to find up there. But when he took a closer look, it became clear that the plants were dying. They needed a gardener. Liam may not have been a gardener, but he knew that he could help. So he returned to the railway the very next day and got to work. The flowers nearly drowned, and he had a few pruning problems, but the plants patiently waited while Liam found better ways of gardening. As the weeks rolled by, Liam began to feel like a real gardener, and the plants began to feel like a real garden. Most gardens stay in one place, but this was no ordinary garden. With miles of open railway ahead of it, the garden was growing restless. It wanted to explore. The tough little weeds and mosses were the first to move. They popped up farther and farther down the tracks and were closely followed by the more delicate plants. Over the next few months, Liam and the Curious Garden explored every corner of the railway. After spending his spring and summer and autumn with the garden, Liam's time on the railway was finally interrupted by winter. Heavy blankets of snow fell on the city that season, and for the first time since he became a gardener, Liam could not visit the plants. Rather than waste his winter worrying about the garden, Liam spent it preparing for spring. After 3 cold months, the snow finally began to melt, and Liam rolled his new gardening gear over to the railway. Winter had taken a toll on the garden. But thanks to Liam's planning, his handy new tools, and a little help from the sun, the plants soon awoke from their winter sleep. The garden had always wanted to explore the rest of the city, and that spring it was finally ready to make its move. Once again, the tough little weeds and mosses set out first. They popped up farther and farther from the railway and were closely followed by the more delicate plants. The garden was especially curious about old, forgotten things. A few plants popped up where they didn't belong. Others mysteriously popped up all at once. But the most surprising things that popped up were the new gardeners. Many years later, the entire city had blossomed. But of all the new gardens, Liam's favorite was where it all began.
We make our journey together in this community of meaning, fostering one another's growth through services, classes, and fellowship. So many of us pour our talent and time into our life together. This is possible also through financial giving. Our pledges and donations support the work of this congregation in nourishing our lives, and our Sunday donations support the work of nurturing our values. So in this offering, let us be grateful for all that we have and all that we can give. Half of the offering we give today goes to our congregation's social justice work, and half will be split with our faith and action partners to support their work in our communities. While we're outside of our physical church, instead of passing the offering basket, we encourage you to use the giving page on the church's website or mobile app. You'll find that link in the chat.
Our first reading is from an interview between Sandor Katz and Emanuel von Lee for Emergence magazine. When I first became interested in all things fermented, I would notice in some article that I was reading, let's say an article about jazz, a certain place and time being one of great musical fermentation, I saw references to artistic fermentation. I saw references to spiritual fermentation, to political fermentation. I learned that the word fermentation comes from the Latin word fervere, which means to boil. And so prior to science settling on an understanding of fermentation as a transformation action of microorganisms, people recognized fermentation by the bubbles. If you ferment pressed grape juice into a wine, you're going to see bubbles. With any liquid that you ferment, bubbles are going to be a manifestation of the fermentation. So it was recognized always as a form of, let's call it cold boiling. And as an extension of that, at least in the English language, people started using fermentation in a metaphorical sense. Anytime things were getting bubbly, things were excited or excitable, that could be a manifestation of fermentation. I'm finding through the Oxford English Dictionary, literature citations from 400 years ago referring to different things as forms of fermentation, such as religious fervor as fermentation. There's a long tradition in our language of using fermentation in this metaphorical sense. I'm trying to explore this more fully and then also explore some of the concepts that I find people frequently projecting onto the idea of fermentation. Specifically, purity and contamination. People assuming that you need to sterilize everything, you have to have a pure blank slate in order to introduce the organisms that you want to grow, which really is contrary to the reality. In general, the organisms of fermentation are found on the foods that we're fermenting, and it's just a matter of creating a selective environment to encourage the growth of the organisms that we want, while simultaneously discouraging other organisms. This is another way in which the metaphor of fermentation really is powerful, because fermentation is all about creating environments. And it's the environment that determines which among the many organisms that are present in any food, in any given situation, are going to be able to thrive. In the metaphorical ferment, it's the same thing. Our environment is shifting, and we have to shift the structure or some aspect of how we're organizing our lives and our society as the environment shifts.
Our special music this morning is a piece by Karen Kramer and the UU Singers performing Shine On Silver Moon.
Shine on,
In this congregation made distant by space, but connected by care for one another, we gather each Sunday to tend to one another's joys and concerns. When we are together in person, we lift up the names of those people we hold in our minds and hearts, aloud and silently. If you are carrying someone in joy or concern this morning, you may share that in the chat box. I want to lift up a particular concern this morning. Yesterday, the Centers for Disease Control ended its national eviction moratorium, which for months has offered protection to families across the country who have struggled to make or catch up with their rent payments. With the end of this moratorium, experts expect evictions will resume en masse. I ask you to keep people facing this massive challenge in your thoughts and prayers. And if you see legal aid or mutual aid efforts, look into them and consider donating. Let our hearts be with all those near and far, with people the world over who are in need of care and who care for their communities. May we bear witness to atrocities that flash before our eyes in quick succession. May we bear witness to the struggles to overcome which we have not yet seen or heard of. When we gather together in our congregation's building, it is our tradition to light 3 candles. One for the joys and concerns we have shared, one for the names we have raised up, and one for all that remains unspoken but present here in our hearts. Outside of our building, gathered here together, we take a moment to honor these joys and sorrows.
Comfort me, comfort me, comfort me, oh my soul. Comfort me, comfort me, comfort me, oh my soul. Sing with me, sing with me, sing with me, oh my soul. Sing with me, sing with me, sing with me, oh my soul.
These words for meditation are from the poem Vespers by Louise Gluck. In your extended absence, you permit me use of earth, anticipating some return on investment. I must report failure in my assignment, principally regarding the tomato plants. I think I should not be encouraged to grow tomatoes. Or if I am, you should withhold the heavy rains, the cold nights that come here so often, while other regions get 12 weeks of summer. All this belongs to you. On the other hand, I planted the seeds. I watched the first shoots like wings tearing the soil. And it was my heart, broken by the blight the black spot so quickly multiplying in the rows. I doubt you have a heart in our understanding of the term. You who do not discriminate between the dead and the living, who are in consequence immune to foreshadowing. You may not know how much terror we bear, the spotted leaf, the red leaves of the maple falling even in August in early darkness. I am responsible for these vines. These words are yours to reflect on as we enter into 2 minutes of quiet thought, meditation, or prayer. Take a long, steady breath deep into your lungs, down into your belly. Let it out again, slowly. Breathe in, count to 4. Breathe out, count to 4. Close your eyes if that helps you find the center of your space. Feel your neck beneath your head, your shoulders beneath your neck, your back beneath your shoulders, down to where you touch the ground. Breathe in and out.
Our second reading comes from A Summer for Transformation by Greg Richardson. Some of us like to remember summers when we were children as times of rest and relaxation. We might think of summer as a time for vacations or for catching up or getting ahead. Summer this year is different. Many of us took time during the last year and a half for reflecting, reading, and resting. We have stayed at home, protecting ourselves and those we love. Our schedules have not included much traveling. Some of us have taken good, clear looks at our lives and our priorities. We have borrowed down and, we hope, planted the seeds of changed lives. This summer is when those seeds that we have planted begin to bloom, a summer of transformation. Like good farmers, we have chosen what we want to grow and prepared the soil of our lives. We planted according to our plans. Month after month, we tended our crops and worked to keep out weeds. We could feel the growth begin in us, even when we are impatient to see its results. There were long months when we wondered whether our work would even bloom. Now, in the summer of transformation, this is when we learn what sort of transformation is taking place in us. Will our lives be transformed as we expect? What control or influence will we have over how we grow? How will we be transformed, and can we prepare for future growth? This summer for transformation holds lessons for each of us. Will we pay attention and recognize how we are being transformed? This is a summer that we will remember. Our memories will not be about where we went on vacation or what we ate. We will remember the summer when we began to feel safe after the pandemic. Our present and our future have not already been determined by what we have experienced. Our experience of the pandemic might shape how we live this summer, but will not determine it. We also recognize there are ways of living that we have struggled to build into our lives or to avoid for years. Sometimes it seems that there is nothing in our control that we can do to change ourselves. Some of us work hard to practice our way out of unhealthy patterns of behavior. We struggle to be better people. I do not believe spiritual practices are ways to force ourselves to become different people. We are not spiritual practice. We do not practice our way into more perfect lives. I believe spiritual practices are now spiritual life, helps us get out of our own way. Spiritual life lives within and through us. Gradually over time, the seeds it plants in us begin to bloom and transform us. Some of us feel guilty about coming through the pandemic unscathed or surviving it at all. Others of us feel relieved that we and our families faced hardships and behaved wisely. The virus continues to infect people in the world and mutate into other variants. As it spreads, it finds new ways to infect people and continue spreading. We might feel we have gotten past the pandemic, but this could be the eye in the center of the storm. This summer is our opportunity to allow what spiritual life is planted and tending within us to bloom and transform us. We may become more contemplative, reflecting on what our experiences have to teach us. Some of us are becoming more aware of the needs of the people around us and around the world. We are not transforming our lives by forcing ourselves into new habits. Spiritual life is our work, the work in us, revealing itself to us as we reflect on it. The seeds it plants in our lives are blooming in this summer for transformation. Our responsibility is to be receptive soil, to allow the seeds planted by spiritual life to bloom and transform us. What will we do today to help us celebrate this summer for transformation? How will this summer for transformation change the rest of this year? Now join us in singing our centering song number 8, Mother Spirit, Father Spirit, who are we?
When I began practicing paganism as a teenager, Lammas was a season I just got. Nestled squarely between the beginning and ultimate end of the growing season, this time of year feels like when we should start thinking about the harvest. Tomatoes, peppers, and zucchini are coming on in full force. Apples, pears, and walnuts continue to visibly ripen. We've cleared the early summer harvests of cherries and berries. It's a turning point that feels very visible to me in a way that the other cross-quarter days don't. A switch seems to flip and the world changes from growing to ripening. The beginning of the harvest season growing up also meant beginning to put food by. The weeks sloping to the end of summer were full of enjoying fruits and vegetables as they were, but also full of canning, freezing, drying, fermenting. While we could enjoy many fruits from our garden and orchard as is, this quickly becomes unsustainable. Putting food by allows people to enjoy them later on after the days shorten and the temperature drops. Indeed, few of the products we enjoyed then or later on in the year were fresh and unprocessed in some way. Transformation is a necessary part of reaping anything we sow. This is the heart of the metaphorical side of the season. Many people take this time of year to check in on the progress of workings, practices, and disciplines that they've started earlier in the year. This is a time of literal harvests, and in sync with this, it is a time for figurative harvests as well. This is a time to reflect on how the metaphorical seeds we've planted are coming to fruit, to think about how we're transforming those harvests and in turn, how they're transforming us. These are the themes I want to reflect on with you today. For many witches and pagans who celebrate it, Lammas is the first of 3 festivals in the wheel of the year that focus on the harvest, followed by the autumn equinox and All Hallows. It's a juncture in the year that shifts focus on the way that things come to fruit. For magical practitioners, it can be a time to see the early outcomes of intention setting and a time to check in on the development of new workings and practices. Whether we're magical practitioners or not, though, many of us at different points have started new endeavors and have put enough investment into them to track our progress. Some of this metaphorical sowing can look like setting New Year's resolutions, such as starting a new hobby or a discipline. Maybe you've committed time to walking or meditating regularly. Maybe you've taken up drawing or reading tarot or playing an instrument. Maybe you've put out job applications after a period of unemployment. Now might be the time to stop and to reflect on those projects. Have they come easily? Have they provided the comfort or the outlet you hoped they would? Did you hear back on any of those prospects? In literal as well as metaphorical gardening, not everything takes root. Now could also be a good time to inspect what didn't take off in our lives. Can you learn anything from the failures you encountered? Sometimes things don't go the way we hoped, or they don't yield the result we were striving for. The learning opportunities these experiences can provide can be just as important as the ones we gain through success. You can ask what you might change next time, or what did you actually need in hindsight? Maybe the answer lies in different seeds, different soil, more rain, less sun. Maybe the goal, maybe the process wasn't what you needed at all. I'm a big fan of introspection, and I spend a lot of time in my own head asking these sorts of questions, sifting and weighing the outcomes of what I've started. Maybe some of you are the same. It's easy for me to say, that's it. That's the harvest and there's nothing else to do here. And sometimes there isn't. Enjoying the process for itself has a lot of its own merit. We don't all need to be book reviewers or chefs or virtuosos to enjoy reading or cooking or making art. And in a world where I see more and more of my peers and friends thinking about how they can market and commercialize their hobbies and interests, I think we do well to enjoy the fruits of our labors as they are, for themselves, with no other intention or agenda. This said, we might find ourselves asking, now what do I want to do with this new skill or perspective or life development? Where do I want to go with it? How do I want to transform it? While you were cultivating this new thing in your life, maybe it reminded you of something else you wanted to do. Maybe you saw something else that it could lead you to if you just adjusted a bit or adjust it drastically. Or perhaps cultivating this new skill or hobby or area of interest was a means to some other end. You might have learned a new skill to get a new job or advance in the one you have. Maybe you learned some woodworking for a bigger home improvement project. Transforming this skill or interest into something else might have been the goal all along. And this too is a process that has its own merit. Far out as it might sound, I think fermentation is a good way to illustrate this literal and figurative process. In the literal sense, traditionally, it's been a way of putting food by, along with drying, smoking, and other processes. The cabbage we've grown won't last forever, but we can enjoy it longer as sauerkraut or kimchi. Milk might not have a long shelf life, but we can extend that by turning it into cheese or yogurt. In many times, in many places, it's been a way to plan for the future and preserve excess. And just as much as it's been an end for itself. We can make bread fluffier by fermenting it. We can make beer and wine and mead by fermenting grain and fruit and honey. Some things, like coffee, tea, or chocolate, are better or at least distinctly enjoyable because of the transformations they've gone through. Figuratively, the process of fermentation can lead us to consider not just what we're changing in our lives, but how. In our first reading, writer and educator Sandra Katz reflects on the role that environment plays in fostering literal and metaphorical fermentation. He comments on the way that fermentation requires shaping environments to inhibit the growth of certain organisms and their characteristics to support the growth of others. He phrases this analogy in a reactive way, suggesting that we should change because our environment is changing. While true, I think this metaphor might be put to better use proactively. Literal fermentation requires a person to focus not only on what they're making, but on the environment in which they're making it. We put care and attention into the setup to foster the outcome we're looking for. In a more metaphorical sense, we can work more intentionally to create the environments necessary for the change we want to see. What do we need to encourage in this transformation? Are there things we need to discourage? Maybe it's dedicated time or dedicated space for meditation or reading or yoga. Maybe we need to rearrange our time or space just a little and scale back on the ambitions we had planned for our new project so it fits more sustainably in our lives. I found plenty of value in the process of transformation itself. Like many people through this pandemic, I cultivated a love of fermenting things. It's a love I've cultivated for many years now and one I grew up with. While I enjoy the end products, I love the process as much, or sometimes even more. I find something profound and mystical about turning cabbage into kraut, fruit into wine, lead into gold. As a pagan, seeing the beginning and final product, but not the microorganisms that make the change, helps me experience the livingness in the world around me. As a Unitarian Universalist, I can see the interdependent web of life at work here. I think this personal experience illustrates the two-way nature of transformation. The process of enacting change can involve some amount of change in ourselves. At another point in his interview, Katz reflects on a common takeaway he's observed regarding fermentation. He says, one thing I often hear from people is it's making them more aware of the invisible forces that are continually at work. When we're focusing on our little jar of vegetables that's fermenting and you can't see any of the bacteria, and yet you begin to see changes. It forces you to pay attention in different kinds of ways, and people carry this beyond the kitchen where they're fermenting in terms of maybe keener sensibilities. After investing all of that time and attention, you pay attention to how interconnected life is. Each little thing involved participates in something bigger, seemingly miraculous. The salt and the cabbage create brine. The brine keeps aerobic bacteria and mold from growing. Anaerobic bacteria preserves and transforms the whole mixture. And slowing down, checking your project every day, you see little changes add up. And seeing this, maybe you'll wonder about the other imperceptible changes happening in the world around you. If nothing else, you might leave the process with a little more curiosity. This example might not carry over for all of you, but it could lead you to think about the changes and projects happening in your life and how they're transforming you. How have they changed your outlook on life? Have they encouraged you to understand something through a new perspective? How are you different today because of the weekly walk you started months ago? What have you experienced because you started meditating or drawing or doing yoga? It's all grist for the mill. It could be that the change is still happening and will only become apparent somewhere over the horizon. In our second reading, Greg Richardson anticipates that change is inevitable and that whatever work we put into cultivating the new things in our life will have an eventual outcome. His emphasis here is that people create spiritual practices so that they can rely on them when it's most necessary. This is true for any practice. When it's hardest to be grounded or inspired or connected, that's when spiritual practice, any practice, pays off, when you're not expecting it to. In his words, this is when we learn what sort of transformation is taking place in us. Through all of these examples, I've talked about projects, harvests, and change on an individual level. Things that in the grand scheme of things are small. But these attitudes and observations apply to bigger changes and manifestations happening in our world as well. We continue to reap the bitter harvests of climate change, xenophobia, anti-Black violence, and anti-Semitism, of numerous other harvests. While we can dwell on how these things have changed us, we can also continue to focus on how we change the world around us in spite of these forces. What environments, big and small, can we change to foster truth or justice or healing and reconciliation? These are also grist for the mill. We change the harvest, and the harvest changes us. While change of some kind is inevitable, we maintain the power to shape how many of those changes occur. So this year over Lammas, consider how your world is changing. Consider how your harvest is coming in. See how it's connected to other or bigger projects in your life. And consider how all of this might be changing you. We close this service with hymn number 1068, Rising Green.
My blood doth rise in the roots of yon oak. The sap doth run in my veins. Boundless my soul, like the open sky, where the stars forever have lain. Where the stars, where the stars, where the stars forever have lain. My hands hold the weavings of time without end, my sight as deep as the sea, beating my heart sounds the measures of old, that of love's eternity, that of love, that of love, that of love's eternity. I feel the tides as they answer the moon, rushing on a far distant sand, weighing my song as the wind of my breast, and my love blows over the land, and my love, and my love, and my love blows over the land. My foot carries days of the old into new. Our dreaming shows us the way. Wondrous my faith settles deep in the earth, rising green to bring a new day. Rising green, rising green, rising green to bring a new day.
As we go our separate ways, may we transform the work of our lives and let our lives be transformed. May we carry forth the lessons that we have learned by the light of this chalice. Wait.
Our closing words are from an interview between Sander Katz and Emmanuel von Lee. In both literal fermentation and metaphorical fermentation, the process is breaking down previous forms into new forms. I think that fermentation is a potent metaphor for how to think about the kinds of changes we need to make. We need bubbliness. We need excitement. We need new ideas. And it's not that I have any idea about what the outcome needs to be. I just know that we can't keep doing what we've been doing, that we need to shift. We need to adapt because our circumstances are adapting. In all that you harvest, may you change, may you be changed. The service has ended, but our service to the wider world continues. Peace, amen, so may it be.